our interactive event that we have here. What we did over the last, well, this is a long project in the working. We finally put the finishing touches on it this month. But what we've done over the last 3 to 4 months is we researched every street name in town. We tried to peel back who they're named after, what they're named after, or why they're named after them. And we've compiled a list of about 71 of our streets. That's right, there are 71 named streets in North Bergen. Now, the number of streets are a little easier to explain. And I'm not talking, from 5th Street to 92nd Street. I'm also talking 1st Ave to 5th Ave. That's also very simple to explain, and we'll go over that as well. I'd like to make this a little more interactive than our normal ones where I just kind of ramble on for a while. So if you have a street that you live on or a street that you're interested in knowing the name, I'll gladly fill that in with you, fill that in for you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. This way you can see kind of what I'm taking a look at here, hopefully, right? So we got a map up of the town here. And what we went out and did was, again, we highlighted, and this will all be available on our website. We highlighted every name street. Now, of course, there's huge gaps here because the system we were using wasn't able to do Grand Avenue in multiple sections or to do, Liberty Ave in multiple sections. But this, in a sense, is every named street in town. And, most of our streets will follow a grid-like pattern, north to south, east to west, which is such the case for an area like North Bergen, considering it was all developed separately. But again, I can't see the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that now. So I guess I will have to do a little more awkward then. So if you have a question, throw it in the chat. I'll gladly just tackle any street name you got, and I'll wait for them to populate a little bit. But originally, the streets in North Bergen, they're kind of few and far between. There's not many streets. We have different neighborhoods, and we've gone over this in the history department. Sorry, I'm still thinking at work. We went over all these things, in regards to the streets and how they get their names. It really came down to the neighborhoods that they were part of. Each different section of town, from Tyler Park to Woodcliff to Bergenwood to the racetrack, to Hudson Heights, all these places are named basically by somebody showing up and just giving it a name. And we're going to see the street names are going to be that way as well. So I guess I'll just wait. If anybody has a street they're specifically interested in, I'll gladly start off that way. All you got to do is throw the street name in the chat, and then we'll take it from there. All right, I guess nothing here. I mean, I'll just kind of ramble them off. Oh, there we go. Columbia Ave. Of course, we asked one of the streets that we don't really know first, right? Columbia Ave is a very interesting street name, mainly because we don't know where Columbia Ave comes from. We know that Columbia Ave, the first section of Columbia Avenue, is laid in Tyler Park, which is the downtown section of North Bergen. And it's laid by the two land developers, Phineas Tyler, great name, by the way, and Charles Gobish. They're the first ones that lay that section of street, basically from present-day 6th Street to about 11th Street. One thing that we kind of were like trying to figure it out, and we know Columbia is kind of a, universal word, and, there's Columbia University. Was it named after that? We don't believe so. What we think it's named after is actually a boat called the Columbia. And the reason we think that is because the Columbia won the America's Cup in 1871. And it was like a big deal when the Columbia won it because it defeated 2 European champions, 2 English ships specifically, that had won the America Cup the last 2 years prior. So we think that Tyler and Gobish named the street after the ship. You know, unlike the university in New York, named after, you know, Columbia, the goddess, we think Columbia in North Bergen is actually going to be named after a boat. Um, Liberty Ave, again, being another one of those streets that run through town. Liberty Ave was named a whole bunch of different names. Uh, Most famously, it was named Germania Avenue at one point. And Germania Avenue probably would have still been here if it wasn't for World War One. During World War One, there is a large anti-German sentiment that sweeps the nation, and it hits especially hard in Hudson County. Prior to the end of World War One, at least prior to 1918, there is massive German populations throughout the county. You know, what is today downtown Union City, you know, was West Hoboken, had a huge German population. Hoboken was a huge German neighborhood. And, you know, in 1917, the township decides to get behind the war effort and they renamed Germania Avenue. They name it Liberty Avenue. So Liberty Avenue, you know, is again one of those streets that, you know, it's a quiet street for the most part, and it's got a very interesting history. Park Ave, right, for Nancy, Park Ave is another kind of relatively easy one, right? Park Ave is going to be obviously named for its leading into the park, going into Hudson County Park. But it's a relatively new name, Park Ave. It was renamed in 1940 because when they changed the street names, they wound up changing a whole bunch of other names as well. Um, and again, prior to 1940, it was known as Woodcliff Avenue for a while. It was also known as Bulls Ferry Road because it predated Boulevard East as we know it today. But Park Ave is going to refer mainly to the park. Dietz Place, for Roseanne giving me a twofer. All right, Dietz Place is going to be, and again, for most people, you know, Dietz Place is not really on their map when it comes to North Bergen streets. It's a small dead end street off Kennedy Boulevard on 22nd Street. But Dietz Place could be named for one of two people. There is the Dietz brothers. There's Charles and Connor Dietz. Charles Dietz is actually going to be mayor of North Bergen for 13 years, from 1900 to 1913. His brother Connor is going to operate a hotel, which was on 22nd Street and Kennedy Boulevard. If you go to our Facebook page, we actually have a great postcard of the Dietz Hotel. And we know it's named for one of them. I was leaning more towards the fact that it's named after Connor. However, there were some people that were helping out with the research that said it's got to be named after the mayor. And I think we all came to an agreement to say it's probably just named after the Dietz family. One of my favorite facts about the Dietz Hotel and the Dietz family is it was the only hotel in North Bergen south of, well, what Schutzen Park is today. So anybody going to Schutzen Park from southern Hudson County, if they didn't want to make their way home, they were forced to stay at the Dietz Motel. You know, they cornered the market. And then Bergenwood Avenue is another one. That is going to be a geographical name. Bergenwood Avenue is actually going to be named after the neighborhood of Bergenwood, right? Originally, Bergenwood Park is an established, you know, a designed community between 90th and 92nd Street. And then it just kind of evolves into the whole neighborhood of everything between Kennedy and Tunnelly Avenue north of 76th Street will be known as Bergenwood. So Bergenwood Avenue is going to come from the naming of Bergenwood Park, in a sense. Another one of those great forgotten neighborhoods that we have. Smith Ave, that's another good one. It's a very old street name in town. What we have there for Smith is it's named after, where I was Newkirk Ave. Here we go. Smith Ave is named after Abel I. Smith. He was a very prominent lawyer who lived in the New Durham section of town, but he owned a ton of property in North Bergen. He was born in theoretically what we used to call North Bergen. He was born in present-day Secaucus. So we're going to count him as one of our own because he was born before Secaucus existed. The Smith family is a very powerful family in the northern end of the county. They're founding members of Grove Reformed Church. So Smith Ave is going to be named after him. Bulls Ferry, right? That is going to be named after a literal ferry point that used to be down on River Road, right at the base of Bulls Ferry Road. The ferry predates, the Revolutionary War. The ferry, Bulls Ferry, was there for years. They say even we think prior to about 1650, they're going to establish a ferry there. We don't know if the Bull family is going to own it. But Bull's Ferry is owned by Absalom Bull during the Revolutionary War, and it's named for him and his family. Actually, the Bull family there are going to serve as loyalists during the war. They're going to side with the British and actually fight against the Americans at the Battle of the Blockhouse, which took place in North Bergen on 74th Street. Then we have Easy Street. That's another one. It's kind of in the unknown section of where that comes from. It's a quiet dead-end street that's kind of just tucked off Tunnelly Avenue. Chances are, this is going to be given by the developer, whoever decided to build on that street. The earliest reference we have to Easy Street is 1934. That is going to be the earliest reference we have. We really don't know what it's named for. We do know there's a very famous Charlie Chaplin film that is called Easy Street. So we think it kind of gets its name from there. We found advertisements that it was one of the early films played at the old Astor Theater and the old Embassy Theater. So we think it might have had something to do with the film. All right. If you got any other streets, we'll go through them. One thing of interest is that, I'll just run through some of the main ones here. Bergen Line Avenue is probably one of the most famous streets in town. North Bergen has about 4.4 miles of it. It's a pretty big road in total. It's an old road. It's been in use for about 150 years. I think one thing that we don't really talk about, and this is something we probably all complain about if you've ever been on Bergen Line Avenue, is when you get to where Union City's section of it starts, it narrows out into a one-way. Well, there's a reason it narrows out into a one-way there. There was once a large town square there, a large green area that the original designers placed in, and as development happened, it was taken out. But that explains why we go from a two-way to a one-way on Bergen Line Avenue. But where the name comes from, it's quite simple. It's Bergen Line. The road will take you to the Bergen County, Hudson County border, the Bergen Line. We know that the road became known as Bergen Line Avenue, or it was known as Bergen Line Road prior to 1890, and in about 1890 it becomes an avenue. Probably has to do with the amount of commercial space that was on there. Dell Avenue, I see in the chat. Dell Avenue was a tough one, not gonna lie. When we were trying to figure this out, we really had no idea what this was. We assumed Dell Avenue was named for a person. We went through countless census records. We went through countless newspaper archives to try to find somebody with the last name Dell in North Bergen. We tried to find somebody with the first name Dell that lived in North Bergen. We had nothing. We then thought it might have been a company that was there. We couldn't find any company with the name Dell in it. And then it dawned on us to just Google Dell definition to see what comes up. And we believe that's where the name is going to come from. A dell, according to the Webster's Dictionary, is going to be a small valley, usually among trees. Now, I know that's really hard to imagine today because Dell Avenue is so industrial, but 100 years ago, well, maybe not 100 years, now we have to go even further back, maybe 200 years ago, 250 years ago, when we have settlers coming in to the New Durham area, if you were to stand on Dell Avenue and look, to the east, you would see the rise of the Palisades. If you were to look to the west, you'd see woodlands and then the Watchung Mountain Ridge rising in the west. So we think Dell Avenue, and it's one of those streets that we've come across, that it was always known as Dell Avenue. There's no other name for it ever. So Dell Avenue, I think, we're pretty confident in saying that it has to do with a historical kind of geographical explanation that Dell Ave is literally named for the Dell that used to be there. We see that with a lot of named streets, especially when it comes to geographical locations. Meadowview Avenue, quite simple. You look out and you see the meadow. It's a meadow view. Things like Hillcrest Road or Hillside Place, they're at the hill. They're on hills. Littler known streets like Lakeview Avenue. And a lot of people might be like, where the hell is Lakeview Avenue? Well, Lakeview Avenue is one of those little streets in the back off of Fairview Road in the next section of town, that kind of part of town that you have to drive into Fairview and Richfield to get into. But Lakeview Avenue is there because it overlooked a lake that was once there where Wolf Creek widens into the Hackensack River. Bar Place and Palisade Plaza, very good questions. Palisade Plaza is going to be named simply for the Palisades. It's sitting atop the Palisades and it's going to be named for them. Most things in this area, you'll see Palisade because it's where it lives so close. Bar Place, on the other hand, is going to be named for Frederick Barr. He's a Hoboken, entrepreneur. He owns several hotels in the county. He owns a couple in New York. We have records that he purchased the areas between Palisade Plaza and New York Avenue in 1899 for about $5,000. So when he develops the area, he develops New York Ave, Palisade Plaza, and he develops the street in between, which is Bar Place. So if you develop it, you get to name it. Broadway is another one. We don't know. We have no evidence that tells us a certain answer. What we do know is that it could literally reference the width of the road. It just could be the Broadway. Very much like Wall Street that's up north of the park. We think it could be a way to kind of, this is a really bad thing to say, but it might have been used as a way to confuse buyers in the New York market to try to get them to accidentally purchase in Hudson County. When they feel like they would have saw Broadway in a real estate listing, they might have bought it because they saw the price was so cheap. And it would have boosted property values for the Woodcliff Land Improvement Company, which owned where Broadway is. So Broadway is, again, it's kind of up in the air. We don't know. Durham Avenue is going to be named in reference kind of to New Durham. Most of North Bergen at one point was just something Durham. You have New Durham, where Six Corners is. You had North New Durham, you had East New Durham, you had South New Durham. So everything had Durham in it at one point. But this name, that Durham Avenue that's there today, is just a recall to the neighborhood that started the town. The street was created in more or less the early 20th century. And originally the street had a bunch of different names, and depending on where you were in town. I grew up on Durham Avenue off 67th Street. So from 63rd Street all the way up to, 72nd Street, that was called New Durham Avenue. But if you were in the upper town, the upper parts of North Bergen, it could be Poplar Street, it could be John Street, it could be Kiesel Street. It really depended where you were. Durham Avenue off of 51st Street was known as 2nd Street. And then again, like I said, in 1940, they changed all the street names and they just kind of uniform all. Again, when you have an urban city grid, I guess you get lucky that you get to just run the street names all over the place. Gare Place, I'll be honest with you, was a huge pain in the butt to try to figure out who it was named for. We actually figured out who it was named for. It's named for a father and son duo, Richard and Harry Gares. And that's the interesting part. It's Gare Place, but their last name was Gares with an S at the end. It's interesting to know or try to understand why they might have dropped it, instead of Gares Place, possessive. But Richard is a German immigrant. He originally settles in Hoboken, but moves to North Bergen around 1920. Why it's named Gare Place is because they operate a successful masonry business. It's going to be on the southwest corner of Gare Place today and Bergen Turnpike. The first reference we could find to that was in 1926. And again, we only have left to wonder, like I said, why is it possessive? Maybe they were afraid it was going to be possessive or plural. We don't know. Givenard Terrace is going to be an interesting one as well. That's named after the Givenard family. In particular, we're going to say Barbara Givenard gets most of the credit for that. She was a young, well, before she was Mrs. Givenard, she was just kind of a young woman who worked in a silk mill. She happened to work in the Givenard Silk Mill, which was in West Hoboken, downtown Union City. And she married the owner of the mill. When they got married, they wound up building this massive house that is, or was, now where Charles Court is, kind of right next to Givenard Terrace. And, the Givenards lived there for years. Barbara wound up donating it as an orphanage. It stood there for some time. But again, we don't really see the name start popping up again until around 1940. Prior to being called Givenard Terrace, it was known as Columbia Terrace because of its location to Columbia Park. Again, it also would have connected to Grand Avenue, or the old Grand Avenue, which ran behind McKinley School. Sorry about that. My dog is guarding nothing. All right. But that's where Givenard Terrace is coming from. Churchill Road, again, I owe this one to Mike Kruglinski. He wrote a great book years ago about the Shadyside neighborhood. Churchill Road is literally named because there was once a church on Churchill Road. The people who lived in Shadyside, they were very straight to the point kind of people. If there was a landmark they could have named it after, they would have. If you look at some of the streets that are in that area, obviously Riverside Avenue, right? It's next to a river. Churchill Road. Well, the road took you to a church, right? Therefore, just call it Churchill Road. Bove Terrace is going to be named after a person. We have let me just make sure. George Bove is a carpenter who basically lives in that neighborhood and buys a bunch of lots in the 20s and starts building them, right? He's going to be the first builder to construct the modern brick home, which you'll see on most of those streets near Bove Terrace. So if you know anybody that lives in that neighborhood, chances are some of those homes on Liberty and Columbia, and they're gonna be built by George Bove, or at least financed by George Bove. Ashoff Place is gonna be named, but it's gonna be named for the Ashoff family. It's gonna be named specifically for Charles Ashoff. He purchases most of the property between 46th and 49th Street off of Tunnelly Avenue from a gentleman named Henry Homburg, who actually the street next to it is literally named after Homburg. It's Homburg Place as well. The Ashoffs take over the whole property, everything back there by the 20s. And we know the street is named after him very shortly. It was prior named for the mayor of North Bergen, James Nolan. So you must have some serious pull if you can replace the mayor's name off of a street sign for your own. And the Ashoff family operated a lumber yard back there. They operated a house moving business. There was a time in 1950 where they actually wanted to change the name. The town wanted to change the name, and a bunch of families that happened to live on the street said, no, 12 families to be exact said no. And out of the 12, about half of them were Ashoffs. So, power in the family numbers on that one. Valley Road is going to be named again, just strictly off of a geographical location. For those of you who don't know Valley Road is going to be off of Wall Street, off of Woodcliff Ave, all the way, it goes straight down a hill. It's probably the worst hill in North Bergen. But it's got like a whole little community in there of people. And again, a lot of other, Ronnie Skokandich, who's a kind of another person that works with us, he dubbed that area Upper Shadyside. So Shadyside kind of grew. And again, like I said, they were no nonsense people. So the roads going into a valley, call it Valley Road. All right, makes the most sense. Heindel Avenue is going to be named after, and this is one of my favorite names to say because it's the craziest name I think I've ever heard. It's named for a guy named Sixtus Heindel. The Heindel family lived and worked there for years. What they originally did, they were corset makers, dressmakers. And eventually when the Heindel family lived, their house is no longer there anymore. Around the 1900s, when Little Coney Island started to kind of explode as this amusement park, the Heindels planted pine trees and operated a pine forest attraction where people would just wander around their property and smell pine trees. Again, the Heindels kind of owned the property, eventually would sell it, but the town decided to name the street after them. I see Amp Place, but I'm assuming that's supposed to be Camp Place. Camp Place is named for Mary Camp. Mary Camp is, again, she's a French immigrant. She comes over here in about 1850. And according to the census records, she makes her money as a broker on the New York Cotton Exchange. So she must have had some connections in France to trade cotton with. Now, we know Camp owned a lot of the property lots on present-day New York Avenue, Camp Place, and Palisade Avenue. It was actually known as the Camp Estate. And she slowly started to sell them off around 1910, but we know the street was named for her in 1905. So she was a pretty big deal in the area. Kiesel Place is named again for another developer. It's going to be named for Johann Kiesel, and he's going to develop pretty much everything we have on Kiesel Place and some of the homes on Kiesel Terrace and even some stuff on Cottage Ave between 73rd and 76th Street. So he immigrates to North Bergen around 1890, and most of his homes on 73rd Street that he builds, they're still there. If you ever take a ride down 73rd Street, you'll notice all the homes are pretty much identical. Those are all Kiesel homes. And most of them he had a bunch of homes pretty much where Dane Court is today and Burlington Coat Factory, was. He had a ton of homes built there. What Kiesel did was he purchased the lots for about $1,100 a lot. And then when he would build a home, he'd flip them for about $7,200. And again, in the early 1900s, that's a big chunk of change for a brand new house. But I mean, they're still there. So Kiesel knew how to build a house. Lucky Lane is a developer name. And I kind of like this one. I think it's funny. We found out that Lucky Lane gets its name. It's dedicated August 30th, 1999. It was a huge takeout in the Jersey Journal about Lucky Lane for some reason. We think the developer, we don't know if this was tongue in cheek or anything like that. But he said, I named it Lucky Lane because Y2K is happening, right? So here's a developer. It's 1999. I guess he's afraid that, computers weren't going to switch over to the year 2000. So he wanted to sell his properties. He named it Lucky Lane, bring him some luck. Tunnelly Avenue. Okay, so Tunnelly Avenue, why is it misspelt all the time? Well, I'm going to tell you this. It's misspelt all the time. Jersey City spells it wrong. We spell it wrong. We just all spell it wrong. There's that great interview where they went through HUD-Post and they asked people to spell Tunnelly Avenue. Some people spell it with one L, some people spell it with two L's, some people, for some reason, only put one N. I don't know. But what we do know is it is named for John Tunnelly Jr. Tunnelly is going to be originally, they're French. Throw the name in there. It's spelled originally with one L, but the E has an accent mark. Depending on who you talk to, in order to have the French sounding version of the name, you would add another L. Some people will argue. But the Tunnelly family makes their way to more or less where the Tunnelly Circle is today in 1835. John Tunnelly Sr. is a very prominent landowner. He's a politician. He's on the Hudson County Board of Chosen Freeholders. He moves to the state senate, and after his death, his children take over the property. And for some reason, they start changing their name to either one L without the accent or two L's and no accent. So it's a very interesting thing. It looks like the family begins to change the name itself. The roadway is not going to be named for the Tunnelly family until 1883. And that's not even the original roadway that I'm talking about. The first Tunnelly Avenue is actually now in North Bergen, at least, what we would call Liberty Avenue today in Six Corners. They changed it to Liberty in 1917 to fix, to do the issues with Germania Avenue because they line up. But prior to that, it would have been known as Tunnelly Avenue. Again, it's one of those things. I think it adds a little interest, to the area that it's spelled differently depending on what town you're in. But now you can tell everybody has it spelled wrong. So it doesn't really matter what the sign says. They're all wrong. But that is what we got. We have a post coming out with every single street. We have streets named after presidents, because they spill in from Guttenberg. We have streets named after inventors, but most of the streets that are named for people are going to be named for the developers. Again, Nolan Avenue is named for the mayor, James Nolan, but he was also a real estate developer. We have Marx Place, which is going to be named for Albert Marx. They own the property up there off Palisade Avenue. Again, we talked about Kiesel Place. One of my favorite streets is Kelly Lane. I think it's just pretty funny because it looks like an alleyway, but it's a full-on street. It's named for John Kelly. He lived more or less where the self-storage units are today. And there's a great story that Kelly would refuse to walk to 70th Street or to 73rd Street, which were the two developed streets when he was living there in the late 1900s. The early 1900s. He refused to walk to those two streets to walk down the hill, and he just kind of made his own path and started buying the property there, and then they named it Kelly Lane. They named it after him. So you have that. We also have Jane Street. I always think that's kind of a sad one, to be honest with you. There's a young girl, and they find out that they find her abandoned back there. At the time when they find her, the road is literally a new street called New Street, and they haven't even come up with a name for the thing yet. She's abandoned, and she winds up being I don't want to say adopted, but she becomes a servant for a famous woman in New York, and then she passes away during a tuberculosis outbreak. And the people who were in that neighborhood at the time remembered her, and they named the street after her. So next time you go down there trying to cut around Tunnelly Avenue and Kennedy, all that stuff down there. It's the only time anybody's on Jane Street. But that's what you got down there. Again, some of the major thoroughfares, Bergen Line takes you to the Bergen County line. Kennedy Boulevard, obviously named for President Kennedy, and quite fast too. It's named for President Kennedy in 1963. The county moved really, really fast on renaming it for him. You have other places, Cottage Avenue. Well, it's named Cottage Avenue because there were a bunch of cottages on it at one point. Railroad Avenue. Well, right next to the railroad, so some of our streets are very obvious. There are some we have no idea where they come from. Wall Street being one. There's no references to walls ever being there. It's not named for a person. We are only left to imagine that it's named because, hey, maybe the Palisades reminded the person of a wall, or maybe because they were trying to lure people in and pretend it was Wall Street. We do know prior, though, to 1909, that's the first time it's named Wall Street. Prior to that, it's known as Dyer's Lane. And that was owned because it was owned by the Dyer family. So they've got it, kind of got removed from the town's consciousness. There's also Short Place. There's a bunch of little streets in town. Nobody knows what it's for. There's nobody named Short that lived on it. We're assuming it's named Short Place because it's really short. It only has one address house on it, and it's only about 40 feet long, the street. So, we have short street. All right. There's also Edward Street. It's the only street in town without an address. Down by, what is that, 43rd Street, I believe. Let me just make sure I get it right. It's kind of where the Dunkin' Donuts is on Tunnelly Avenue, the one where you can't make like random a left turn out. Edward Street, again, it's named for Edward Rowland. He owns all the property down there. Again, it's 42nd Street, sorry. He's born in New Durham in the 1860s. And again, they named the street after him. Originally, 42nd Street was known as Rowland Street. So the guy named every street he developed after himself. That's really all I got for you guys. I don't have much else. We have a couple of things in the works coming up down the road. Currently, we are trying to get a plaque put up for the Battle of the Blockhouse. We have the 200, the anniversary of the Revolutionary War happening. So we're trying to get something going for that. We're also trying to get some work done in trying to get another plaque at the image, or where the location where the Three Pigeons Inn was located at one point near Grand Ave and Bergen Turnpike. You know, again, these were major sites during the Revolutionary War. That's kind of hard to believe considering, you know, we're North Bergen. We don't really notice it as much, but we were a major crossing grounds for the Revolutionary War. And we have that in the works. We have an art project going on with some student volunteers from the high school as they work diligently in quarantine. Oh, no, don't worry about it. On the West Side Avenue. It's on the west side of town. Therefore, we call it West Side Avenue. Very simple one. You know, sometimes simplicity is the best way to name things. So again, West Side Avenue is a relatively newer street in North Bergen. You know, when we spoke with people during our North Bergen Stories event, they all told us stories about how there used to be Tunnelly Avenue, and then that was it. And then they developed West Side Avenue later on in the 70s and the 80s. And, you know, they just simply named it. It's on the west side of town, and there you go, West Side Avenue. All right. But again, we have our art project going on with our students at the high school, recreating postcards from 100 years ago with a more modern twist to them, what it looks like today. We are always on the hunt here in the Historical Society for materials. So if you have any photos or anything like that or memorabilia, we will gladly digitize them for you and add them to our collection. You obviously get to keep the original, but we would like to digitize as much as possible. Also, we're always available for any questions at our Facebook page. We offer home research and any other North Bergen historical needs you might have. So that's all I got, guys. Thanks for passing by. Thanks for hanging out at my house. And I will see you guys next time. Not sure what we're doing yet, but you'll find out pretty soon. All right. Have a great night, guys.